Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome. And thank you for finding us. I hope you're doing well. If you like this video, if you like Hong Kong cinema, if you like Blu-rays, if you like reviews, if you like martial arts movies, and all that other fun stuff that we're here to talk about today, please do subscribe. It would be a huge help if you are not already subscribed. It helps the channel a lot. I know I say that a lot, but it's always true. And you give us a comment and a thumbs up. That would also be much appreciated. I love jumping into the comments. People who are subscribers to this channel who comment a lot know that. I've made a lot of really good friends through doing this channel. It's really exciting. It's probably my favorite thing about doing it. So let's get right into this video. Oh, wait, hold on. Quick shout out to our patrons too. This channel would not run the way it runs without our patrons, and I do exclusive videos in there, wicked early release videos in there, and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So please do go and check that out. If you feel so inclined, let's get right into this video. We are here today to talk about Lady Reporter, hell yes, also known as Blonde Fury, released in 1989 as a Golden Harvest film, excuse me. And it was directed by Mong Hoi / Corey Yun. There's a lot to talk about with this movie. So the movie stars Cynthia Rothrock. It is notably, as many people point out on this release, the first Hong Kong film to star a Western lead and a Western female lead at that. Mong Hoi is also in the film. Chin Sui Ho, who is in Two Champions of Shaolin, which is a movie I really like, Shaw Brothers movie. He's in Masked Avengers. He's in Mr. Vampire. He's in The Seventh Curse, which came out from 88 Films last year with Chow Yun-fat in that film. Elizabeth Lee is in it. Billy Chow is in it. Jeff Falcon is in it. Vincent Lin, Wu Ma, like tons and tons of faces you will definitely recognize. There's an unnamed Thai boxer, which is another fun thing that comes up again and again and again in the commentary tracks and interviews here, that there's a guy in this movie who was like cast because he was a legit Muay Thai champion, and no one can remember his name. Nobody knows who he is, but he has a really awesome fight scene in this movie. And then the villain is played, this is amazing, the villain is played by Ronnie Yu. Okay, so if you know Hong Kong cinema, you know who Ronnie Yu is. If you don't know who Ronnie Yu is, he directed Legacy of Rage, which is like this cult classic film that Brandon Lee stars in. He directed The Bride with White Hair, which is a very famous Hong Kong film. He directed The Occupant, which is a well-known film. He directed Freddy vs. Jason, and he directed The Bride of Chucky, and he directed Fearless with Jet Li. So this dude's like a legendary director, and he plays the villain in this movie. And I'm just checking my notes. 26th of June, 2023 is the release date for this Blu-ray. To give you an idea of what this movie is about, there's Cynthia Rothrock plays an FBI agent who is sent undercover as a reporter to Hong Kong because someone is counterfeiting U.S. money in Hong Kong. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, wouldn't she be the FBI deals with domestic stuff? Wouldn't they send a CIA agent? Anyway, plot points being neither here nor there, as is often the case in Hong Kong cinema. So she's undercover as a reporter, and she meets a reporter played by Mong Hoi, who works for this like failing newspaper, and he kind of gets wind of this investigation into this money counterfeiter guy, and he's like, maybe we could save our newspaper by like running this sensational story on breaking this news kind of thing. So they're like kind of helping each other. They're kind of rivals. And then this other guy, played by Chin Sui Ho, is like an undercover cop pretending to be an insurance agent. There's a lot of people hoodwinking one another in this film. So Cynthia Rothrock, when she gets a job as a reporter, where she's actually an undercover FBI agent, is partnered with this guy who it turns out is an undercover Hong Kong cop. So he has his friend cop pretend to be an insurance agent to get close to Cynthia Rothrock to like kind of trail her and see what's going on. And then Cynthia Rothrock's best friend, who is played by Elizabeth Lee, who is like a classmate of hers when she was in school, her dad is played by Roy Chow, who's in like Enter the Dragon and all these amazing movies, right? And Roy Chow is like a prosecutor who is involved in this money laundering, or money printing counterfeiting case. So all of these people who are involved in this money counterfeiting case are just kind of like swirling around in this giant vortex of trying to figure out what's going on and either get the news out as a story for a newspaper or bust them as like, you know, the government people want to do. And Cynthia Rothrock is kind of at the center of all of this. And it's an interesting narrative because in a way it's kind of Jackie Chan-esque in that you have like basically a central protagonist. You do kind of have a group of characters, but you have basically a main character going through like plot point to plot point. And this movie does have a lot of kind of silly humor in it. So in that respect, it's kind of Jackie Sammo. It's not like a really serious, dark, brutal, violent movie. At the same time, it does have this thing where you have multiple groups of characters who are they all have their own designs and they're all kind of pursuing their own goals. That kind of reminded me of the Corey Yun like twofer from the 80s, which is Yes, Madam and Righting Wrongs, in the way that in those films you have all these different characters who are all pursuing different goals. They end up teaming up with one another in different ways to try to achieve different things, but the narrative is kind of diffused through multiple groups of characters. So it kind of has that narrative device, but it also is kind of reminiscent of like a Jackie film in that in some of these Sammo films, you really have like an hour of comedy and then you get into like a final action set piece. Whereas this film is like moves much more in a linear way, in almost like a Western screenwriting style from like plot point to plot point. And then you have like the fight and action stuff along the way. There's four, if I counted correctly, there's four like major kind of like action set pieces in this film. I will say, if you're going into this movie thinking that it's going to be like Righting Wrongs or like this really brutal, violent movie with just chaos everywhere, it's not like that. It's much more comedic. I really enjoyed this film. I was thinking, I don't really rate movies. If I were to rate this movie, I would give it like, to me, this is the perfect 3-star movie. What do I mean by a 3-star movie? It's a movie you enjoy that's like a comfort food, super entertaining, fun movie where you don't have to think too much and you can watch a great cast do silly and fun stuff and have awesome badass fight scenes and you just enjoy what you're doing. It almost kind of reminded me of Skinny Tiger, Fatty Dragon. In that case, it's not like a 5-star, Skinny Tiger, Fatty Dragon is not like 5-star best Sammo movie ever made, but it's a really, really fun, entertaining film. When I say comfort food, like this genre of contemporary 80s films set in Hong Kong is like kind of comfort food type of movie for me because it's got like the great shots of the city and the cast you're familiar with and a lot of kind of familiar story beats, a lot of fun fighting. Like, you know what to expect and it's fun and it's entertaining. I have seen some people say that they were a little bit disappointed by this movie. I kind of knew what to expect going into it. I think I didn't think I was going into like the ultimate lost masterpiece. Like, everything I had heard about this movie is that it's just a really fun like action movie. And the tone was exactly what I expected, kind of like fun, silly, funny, and I just enjoyed it. And like, it's not a movie that you have to kind of analyze too deeply. It's just a fun movie. The release, on the other hand, from Eureka is absolutely excellent. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. I expected to get a really fun, entertaining, like 90-minute movie out of this release. I did get that. But I also got, which I did not expect. I just said comma out loud because I'm so used to voice texting that I have to speak my grammar. And I just said comma in my video. Woo! I'm going to have a sip of water and we're going to think about that comma. Pregnant pause. I did not expect to get out of this video a really incredible overview of the Hong Kong film industry in the late 1980s, behind the scenes, like talking about the nuts and bolts of how movies were made and how the business was run from multiple perspectives. This release, in a way, kind of reminds me of Yes, Madam, in that when that release came out, I was like, oh, this is a really fun movie. Michelle Yeoh, Cynthia Rothrock, I really like this film. Awesome fight scenes, and it'll be fun. And then it turns out it gives you this incredible insight into the film and the industry. And this release does the exact same thing. There's amazing insight into not just the making of this film, but the Hong Kong film industry more broadly speaking. And I have the press release here. I know people like to see these sometimes. So there you go. There's the press release from Eureka. I was holding on to that along with my notes. So it's an essay by James Oliver. This is limited edition 2000 that comes with the slipcase, and that comes with the slipcase is artwork by Darren Wheeling. And then the essay is by James Oliver. And he kind of talks about like the historical significance of this film with having a Western lead in a Hong Kong film. He talks about Mong Hoi's career and a lot of other kind of the context around the film and what stands out to him about the film. And so let me give you my thoughts on the movie just briefly, and then I'll get into the bonus material here that makes this really so excellent. Like I said, it really just is a super entertaining film that has that kind of Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung type of tone, in that it's a bit serious, but it's also silly. It has time to have like comedic asides. The comedy in this movie I thought was fun. It's a very, very 80s movie. It has excellent music. Like, the fashions are so 80s. The cars are so 80s. Like, the product placement is so 80s. Like, there's a scene where Cynthia Rothrock is like driving through Hong Kong in a convertible, and there's like a very blatant shot of like a cup of Coke and a McDonald's hamburger in her car, and then she's like eating the hamburger and drinking Coke, like driving down the street. It's like so 80s. I'm just looking at my notes here. And it's just that I really like the fight scenes in this movie. There's a really cool scene where Cynthia Rothrock is like on scaffolding outside of this building, and she's fighting with all these different henchmen of like the main villain. There's a fight of her and or Billy Chow, excuse me. And Billy Chow is like a legit actual like champion kickboxer. The two of them are fighting in this apartment, and it's a really good like hard hitting fight scene where like she's like thrown through glass, and they're like throwing this table at each other, and then she kicks him through a glass coffee table. It's like a pretty brutal fight. And then there's a scene where Chin Sui Ho, Mong Hoi, and Cynthia Rothrock all kind of go into this factory looking for like evidence to this money counterfeiting operation, and they fight Billy Chow, and then they fight the Thai kickboxer. Dude, that scene is awesome. And Cynthia Rothrock versus the Thai kickboxer guy is really good. And the Billy Chow versus the Chin Sui Ho fight kind of reminded me of Dragons Forever. It's kind of like similar location with like those railings that Yoon Bu is doing all that acrobatic stuff on in Dragons Forever. It's kind of like that. Like, and there's like hard hitting, face kicking, blood. Like, that's like a really good hard hitting fight. And then at the end, you have of course like the big set piece, and Cynthia Rothrock fights Vincent Lin and Jeff Falcon, and then she fights. A whole mess of people on like this rope net tent kind of thing. It's like this really cool kind of like acrobatic fight scene that kind of reminded me of like a Jackie type of thing. Almost like if you've seen, well, actually, which interestingly came out the same year, I think, 1989, Miracles or Mr. Canton versus Lady Rose. There's that scene where Jackie is fighting all of those guys in like a rope factory, and they're on this kind of like scaffolding thing, and there's like ropes and stuff like that. But it's a really cool sequence, and it's just an entertaining movie. Like I don't think this is the kind of movie that begs like an extremely deep analysis. Like I said, the way that the narrative is structured is kind of interesting. You definitely see similarities between this film and Yes, Madam and Righting Wrongs in terms of having like a diffuse narrative where multiple characters are kind of pushing and pulling things forward and driving the narrative in different directions, which is you wouldn't see that in a Hollywood movie of this era. You would have like a single protagonist who's going from point A to point B, and all the other characters are kind of going along with them. This one kind of moves in interesting ways. There's a section of this movie with Mong Hoi, and then Wu Ma plays Mong Hoi's dad in this movie. There's like a section where it kind of goes off into the two of them, and I at some point I was like, oh, Cynthia Rothrock kind of disappeared for like 10 minutes of this movie, and that's not a bad thing. Like I think those structural devices are really interesting because they continue to produce intrigue, right? Like we know that the good guys are going to win in this type of movie, and we know there's going to be fight scenes, and we know the bad guys are going to get busted somehow. But when you go off into the perspective of a different character, it becomes a less linear story. It's less predictable than like the Hollywood movie where you have one protagonist, you know what their goal is, and you kind of just see the whole thing unfold before it even happens, right? Where in this, you're like, oh wait, Mong Hoi's the protagonist kind of now, or is he? And then we're off here with the Chin Sui Ho character, and we're like, wait, he's like an undercover cop, and now we're going this way, and like it's less predictable, which makes it more interesting to me. This really though is a movie to me, like it has those really good fight scenes and action sequences, but I think if you're not interested in the story, if you're like a pure action junkie and you want a movie like The Raid where it's just like nonstop bloody fighting the whole freaking time, this is not the movie for you. So I want to talk about the release now. So there's an 18-minute long scene-specific commentary with Cynthia Rothrock and Frank Zheng, which is fantastic. There's a 16-minute long interview with Cynthia Rothrock. There's a 9-minute interview with Mong Hoi. And then you have commentary tracks, one with Mike and Arna, Mike Leader and Arna Venema. And then you have one with Frank Zheng and Vincent Lin, who Vincent Lin being in this film. All together, these bonus features are incredible because they give you the perspective of the star of the movie, Vincent Lin, who is in the film, Mike Leader, who has worked in the industry for whatever, like 30 years and knows all of the people involved in this film and all like the history behind it and stuff like that. And then you have Mong Hoi, who's the director of the film. Their perspectives are so different on the central question behind this movie, which kind of seems to be, what is the deal with this movie? Because I didn't know this. Apparently this movie was shot and then put on a shelf and then taken off the shelf, and the reshoots were done, and it was kind of turned into a new movie, and then that's what was released. So in the scene-specific commentary, Frank Zheng asks Cynthia Rothrock about this. He's like, so Mong Hoi directed the movie, but Corey Yoon directed reshoots, and what was the deal? What Cynthia Rothrock says is they shot for about 5 months, and then thereafter, they came back and they did about a month of reshoots with Corey Yoon, and like that was it. It was like a whatever 6-7 month long process, and that was the whole thing, right? And one of the ways that you can tell what are reshoots and what are not is that Cynthia Rothrock's hair changes a lot. like almost scene to scene at times. And a lot of the other characters, their hairstyles are like totally different scene to scene. And you could tell like whether things were shot like months later or whatever, right? Okay. So Vincent Lin, who is in the movie, like I said, tells a very different story. He says that he was brought in to do reshoots with Corey Yuen after the movie had been sitting on a shelf for like a year. And they didn't know what to do with it. Now, what Mike Leader says, which is fascinating, is that they shot the movie. Cynthia Rothrock went to the U.S. to do the China O'Brien movies. And when she was there, she got a call from Sylvester Stallone, who wanted her to be in a movie with him that William Friedkin, who directed French Connection and like The Exorcist and Sorcerer, right, was going to direct. So Golden Harvest was like, oh, like Stallone wants her. She's like legit international box office potential. We should take this movie and spruce it up and like touch up the story and reshoot it and add some action and whatever, and then market it some more, right? What Mong Hoi says is that he was, so, and interestingly, Cynthia Rothrock says the whole thing was Mong Hoi's idea. He went to Golden Harvest and was like, I want to make a movie. I want it to be about this, whatever, right? She was actually dating him at the time too. So this is an interesting perspective from her. He says that he'd been doing stunt directing and choreography for a long time. Like he did Royal Warriors, he did Righting Wrongs. I think he did like tons of stunt choreography and collaborations with really famous directors. Like he was one of Sammo's like, you know, right-hand guys. And like he worked a lot with Corey Yuen and stuff like that. And according to Mong Hoi, Golden Harvest asked him to direct a movie. And he's like, yeah, okay, sure. And at the time he was acting in another movie. So he needed Corey Yuen to be his almost like co-director. And he says like Corey Yuen helped me design every single stunt and fight in this movie. He shot a lot of the stunts and fights. He did the whole climactic like ending stunt and fight like on his own. I wasn't there for that. I was off doing this other movie that I was acting in. I couldn't be there for that. And he talks about how like the script was initially, because you know Mike Leader and Arna Venema do this really, really great analysis of like the plot elements of this movie and how you can tell that they're like, if you look at, you know, certain scenes, you can tell they're like Frankenstein together because like they don't exactly match up with the central goals of like the people and what the movie is supposedly about, right? What Mong Hoi says is that they had this kind of complicated script that he thought was just too busy. And so he asked them to simplify it. What Mike Leader says is that they went back and they looked at the movie after it was done and were like, oh, we can spruce this up and add new plot elements and make it more interesting. So you have all these perspectives from people who were in the movie or who were involved in the industry for a long time and would really know this kind of stuff. And everyone kind of seems to have a different idea of what actually happened with this movie. And it's so interesting. I loved listening to all these people and watching it. Like Vincent Lin talks about like, oh, like I remember the first scene that I was in was this particular scene. And that was like kind of the beginning of the reshoots. And you know, then to hear Cynthia Rothrock's perspective of like, there's one scene where Frank Jeng is like, this is a reshoot, right? And she's like, no, it's not. And you can tell because my hair is this shade of blonde, not this shade of blonde. It's like so interesting. And Cynthia, like within her interview too, Cynthia Rothrock talks about a bunch of other stuff. Like she talks about how like the scene with Roy Chow was like tough to shoot because there was like shin kicking and she has like really sensitive shins. And then she got kicked in the face in that movie. Billy Chow. Did I say Roy Chow again? Can you imagine Roy Chow like trying to fight with Cynthia Rothrock? He's like 20 years older than her and he's an actor. He's not a martial artist. Billy Chow. And she got thrown around a lot. And like she says that she got beaten up a lot in this movie. Like she took a lot of kicks and punches. And at some point she was like, can I kick somebody back, please? But then she talks about the scene that she fought with the champion Muay Thai guy was really hard because he's a Muay Thai guy. Like he's used to kicking the shit out of people. And so he was hitting like hard and she's wearing a dress and leggings in that scene. So she couldn't wear padding on her legs because it would be too obvious. She did get to wear metal like she wore like metal arm plates so that he could actually like really kick her arms and she could block it. But she said she got like a lot of bruises doing that during that scene because he like really hit hard. And there was no way to pad certain parts of her body because of the costume that she was wearing. So she, you know, she like kind of shares a lot of insights into the process of making this film and the process of it. She talks about how like when she was with Golden Harvest, she didn't really know what movie was going to be next. They'd just be like, okay, we're putting you in this movie. She's like, okay. And then she would show up on the set. There was no script. And they'd be like, today we're shooting this. And she'd be like, okay. Like she didn't know the plots of the movies. And she didn't know like who the characters were sometimes. And like you just showed up and you did what they told you to do. And that to me is like also a really fascinating insight into the industry. Because you think about these people like, I think, was it Kent Cheng I feel like I saw this. Oh, it was when I interviewed Simon Wilson, if I'm not mistaken. So Simon Wilson played the vampire in Vampire's Breakfast, and Kent Cheng plays the lead in Vampire's Breakfast. And Simon Wilson was saying that Kent Cheng was like shooting 7 movies simultaneously, and that he would show up on the set of that movie and just be like asleep in a chair. And then they like poke him and be like, okay, it's your scene. And he just get up and be like, okay, what are we doing? And he just like do it, like the absolute most amazing consummate professional. And then he just go fall asleep in the chair again. And like, he didn't even really know what was going on. And they just wake him up and tell him what to do. And he'd be like, okay. And it's just interesting to think about how the industry is now, where, especially in the United States is really more what I'm talking about, but where actors are so, once they really, obviously when you're young and you'll do anything, but once you reach a certain level, you're like, I want to work with this director, or I want to work on this type of project, or I really want to read the script first, or whatever. So interesting to think about an industry in which the actors just wanted to act, and they just showed up and they did what they were told to do, and then they moved on to the next thing, and they were shooting all these movies at once. And it's a really interesting insight into that industry. And you learn so much from Vincent Lin, and like, he had just done Tiger Cage and he was going to go back to the US, and then Golden Harvest was like, would you be willing to do this reshoot thing? And like, it's just, I love this kind of stuff. I feel you can make like documentary movies about the behind the scenes of these films, like this film, like Yes Madam, where there was like the whole thing where it was a really violent, brutal movie apparently, and then they asked Corey Yuen to add more comedy into it because they were nervous about the commercial potential of it. And you get all these different perspectives on that film from the Eureka release, and from this Eureka release you get all these different perspectives on this film. Like, it really is like watching like a behind the scenes documentary where you get all these different viewpoints on what was going on, and you can kind of start to put the pieces together yourself. So it's Lady Reporter / Blonde Fury, a very entertaining, like I said, like perfect 3-star film that I really enjoyed watching. It's like a great comfort food type of movie, and you get this phenomenal release with all these incredible bonus features, which I cannot emphasize enough. My name is Will. This is Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching, as always, and we will see you next time.